Good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to wrap up the logistics and transportation module that we started last week. We'll also talk about upcoming assignments and finally review exam number one. So the exam number one is due next Wednesday, the 6th of February. And it is due at the beginning of class or 1 p.m. We'll talk about that at the end of this lecture. So just really briefly, in terms of upcoming assignments, this is your order for presentation number one. Again, presentation one will be Monday, the 4th of February, and we will get started just as soon as everyone gets to class. So please come prepared, especially if you're one of the first few groups listed here. To present, I would suggest putting your presentation soft copy on a thumb drive, just so that we can move through pretty quickly, and then bring me a hard copy of that so I can take some notes. We'll do about 8 minutes per, a couple minutes for questions, and move through fairly quickly. So again, that is Monday the 4th. If you have any questions on that, definitely let me know sooner rather than later, just so we can get those updated. So just picking up where we left off in Monday's class, just want to spend a minute or two talking about inbound versus outbound. So everything on the left side of this dotted line, this is inbound freight coming into your facility. And in terms of control, you can exercise considerably more control over inbound freight than you can outbound. Unfortunately, a lot of companies choose not to do that, and we'll spend some time talking about those differences. On the outbound side, you actually decide when to ship, but that's based on customer orders, right? So if they want them within 2 days or 3 days or 5 days, you're going to have to adjust your outbound strategy to that. So we'll dive in. We'll actually talk about outbound first. So it is highly variable. Customer demand is always going to be variable. There's things that you do to drive up the variability on it as well. You also have very little control of where that demand is going to be. One thing that's interesting, you can actually make some money on your outbound logistics. We had customers that would charge like a 15% surcharge on every order for delivery. And then our goal obviously was to stay well under that, and then that was a profit center for the business. In terms of a pricing strategy on the outbound side, there's a lot of different ways to do it. One option, charge a cost per unit, where like if you get a Toyota Camry, it doesn't matter if you live in Lexington or if you live in San Francisco, you're going to pay the same vehicle delivery charge, regardless of where you're located and how far it's shipped. Another option is a variable rate, where you're charging some kind of factor that includes the distance traveled or the work it took to get it there. And then finally, you can bundle the price. So basically you just quote them a delivered price on your goods. All three of these are incredibly common, and really your decision of which one to use is based more on what fits into your schedule than anything else, or your strategy. Finally, you also have to figure out like where you're dealing or where you're delivering to. So do you have a set of dealers like a auto manufacturer does, where they kind of get the process and they understand things, or are you actually delivering to end customers? So think like a Tempur-Pedic mattress. If you're dealing to a mattress store, that's kind of the equivalent of a dealer. They understand how it works, right? You can tell them, I'll be in every Monday afternoon, and I'll bring a truckload of mattresses to you. That's going to be great for them. When you call to schedule a delivery for an individual store or an individual customer at their house, it's a completely different conversation. Like, well, I don't know if I could be in on Tuesday. Let me check my schedule and see if I could be home to pick up the delivery, right? So the complexity and the work that goes into delivering directly to end customers is like exponentially higher than dealing with dealers. And obviously your network could be every home in America, right? Which is kind of daunting to think about. So in terms of strategies on the outbound side, one option that's really common, especially you see it a lot with furniture stores and kind of non-traditional freight, is a dedicated fleet, where typically the company owns the assets, all the drivers are employees of the company, On the plus side, it is a fixed cost, which I guess could be a negative as well. But it's not going to vary based on the market at any given time, and it can be your most efficient option because you control, who's going where, how much you're paying for it, as opposed to like using someone else's fleet or brokering. Those prices could vary really dramatically based on time of year and things like that. You get a ton of benefit on the customer service side because it's your employees talking to the customers, which is excellent. You also have like an insane level of control. You get to decide what time they deliver, what message gets communicated to the customer, all of these things. There is a potential for backhaul. I'll explain that here in a couple slides. Another strategy that we used to implement with some of our outbound customers is to do something called like a zone shipment or zone delivery schedule. Basically, you set up certain regions of the country or regions of your geographic area, and say, every Monday we'll deliver to the Northeast, every Tuesday Midwest, Wednesday Southeast, etc. And then throughout the days and weeks, whoever your customer is, they can know based on which zone they're in when they can expect a delivery. So that makes you actually a lot more efficient because you can bundle everything together and fill up trucks a lot better. On the negative side, your lead time could vary. Like if you were a Wednesday delivery and it's Thursday, the soonest you can see a delivery is the following week, right? So it can mess with lead times a decent amount. And then another option, and this gets into kind of our discussion on demand variation we had a few weeks ago. You can incentivize your customers to order in full truck quantities. If it's something that's being ordered regularly, that's probably not a huge deal. But if it's something where a full truck represents 6 months worth of orders for that customer, that's probably not your best strategy. Again, it's going to be the cheapest cost in terms of transportation because it's really efficient. However, it causes a ton of variation within your operation, within your customer's operation, and it also extends the timeline, which could mean your customers are not excited to be purchasing that, right? You kind of ruin the purchase experience. So just to give you an example of what those backhaul opportunities would look like for a private fleet. So let's say you're out in California and you've got these 5 customers that you need to make deliveries to. So you send your truck out. Like, how cool is this, right? Isn't that awesome? You send your truck out and it makes 5 deliveries, right? The truck is empty. Let's bring it on home, right? So you've recouped the cost of driving that truck by either charging them for deliveries or you bundled the price in, but you've accounted for it, right? But on the other hand, another way of looking at this is you have a truck. Goodness gracious, is that South Dakota? Or I think nope, that's Nebraska. That's embarrassing. So you've got a truck sitting in Nebraska, right, that needs to get back to California. So wouldn't it be awesome if, looking at your supply base, there was a supplier that was kind of on your way home, right? So when you have a private fleet, you can tell that driver, hey, why don't you head down into Arizona or maybe New Mexico and make a pickup on your way back, and then maybe stop in Nevada or Utah and make some delivery or make some pickups, right? And then bring those back to the plant. So essentially what you've just done is the cost you would normally pay to ship from these 2 suppliers, other than the few extra miles you're adding, you've basically got those delivered free of charge, right? So there's a massive opportunity if you have your own fleet to kind of combine your outbound to your customers and your inbound from your suppliers, and just kind of make some loops out of it. Really, really beneficial. A lot of companies want to get there, but it requires a very standard process and stable process to make that work. Here's an example of that zone shipment schedule. So again, we're going to deliver everything in the West on Mondays or whatever day of the week that is. and then the customers come to expect those deliveries on certain days of the week. So let's talk about inbound for a few minutes. Inbound logistics is absolutely less variable than the outbound process, mainly because it's based on production. So unless your production schedule is just completely all over the map, you're typically going to be producing larger quantities of products at a given time. So 100 of these a day, 5,000 of those every day. So what you need to make those products is also going to be pretty stable. You also have more complete control of the demand because you're actually choosing, where do we get it from, what quantities, what dates, etc. There are massive cost savings opportunities. We talked about one of these during the scenario review we did in Monday's class. And then on the supplier side, one thing that you really do need to figure out is, how are we going to pay suppliers? Are they going to be paid a piece price that's separate from the transportation, where it's, how much are you going to charge me per steering wheel? Or are we going to let them quote us a delivered price that includes the transportation to get it there, right? And we'll explain the difference in those in just a minute. But that's something you need to establish with your suppliers at the very beginning of the process. One thing that is really helpful on the inbound side, especially if you are going to control it and manage it, is figuring out when you purchase a product or set an agreement to purchase a product, where are those products going to come from? We had a supplier when we worked with Polaris that they shipped from about 15 different locations depending on where they had parts available, and it could be the same part coming from all 15 of those locations. Some in the Minneapolis area right by the plant, some in California or Texas. And so our logistics plan would change based on where they were going to ship it from, which was obviously threw everything into out of whack. And secondly, let's say you've got the cheapest part, and I'm comparing you to another supplier, and your part is a little bit cheaper, but half the time you ship it from Texas and half the time you ship it from 5 miles away. That's obviously a huge difference in price, right? So we need to consider that when we're deciding which supplier we're going to use. So establishing, where exactly is this part going to ship from is absolutely critical on the very front end of the process. So we talked about this first scenario. We went through it in class. I just want to hit on a few things really briefly, and I will upload the solution along with these videos. So basically the order of operations here, we applied the volumes to the orders. I showed you guys that VLOOKUP technique. And then the second piece, and I think some of you may have missed this one, was consolidate those volumes to the same origins and destinations. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. And then the third piece is just doing the routing exercise, right? So again, the first step, apply the volume to the orders. In this example, I went ahead and put the weight out there to the side as well. And then the next thing I did, I used something called a pivot table. You could do this manually as well. Basically what I wanted to find out was like, okay, what's everything going to plant 1? Okay, we had some things from Johnson Controls, some things from Trim Masters, which totaled 25 pallets, right? Next, we've got for plant 2, we have all three suppliers shipping to plant 2. You can see that's 20 pallets, right? So looking at this, just like if I was engineering this, the very first thing I would notice is like, wow, 25 pallets is a full truck. That's a pretty good deal, right? Is there a better way for me to possibly route this truck or these trucks? I really don't think so. And obviously some of that comes with experience, but just kind of first blush, what I notice, hey, let's send these 2 suppliers to this plant, and let's send these 3 suppliers to this plant. And that's exactly what we did in this example. So we went from Johnson Controls to Trim Masters to plant 1. We paid for 1 stop because the first and last stop are free. So we had a total of $12.98. The second truck, we had 4 stops, the 3 suppliers plus the plant. So we paid for 2 of those. And with miles and stop charges, our total was $12.97. So it was actually a little bit closer on miles. So our total cost was just under $2,600. The current cost, kind of the baseline, was almost $5,000. So we had a savings of $2,375, and a few of you actually got a little cheaper than that, so a little over $2,400. So nice work on that. So again, I said this in class, but just to be really, really clear, a 47% savings is huge, right? And you're not going to do that on every route every time, right? But you may save $2,300 on this route, which if this is a weekly shipment, you've now saved over 100 grand with one routing change, for the year, right? So you start stringing a few of those together, and suddenly you're talking about double-digit cost savings on your inbound transportation network, right? So all you did was switch it from the suppliers are in charge of when to ship it to you are in charge and you manage the shipping process, right? And I'll explain the difference to that in just 1 second.